Just a couple more minutes, Scott, and then we'll get started. All right, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome, everyone. Today we have Scott Clausen to talk about visualizing your data with KPI reporting and Project Online from PPM Works. So I'm very interested in listening to the session because KPI reporting is important for every organization. This session is being recorded, so it will be available for on-demand to view later. And if you have any questions, please use the chat option to ask those questions, and we will spend some time answering those towards the end of the presentation. Scott, take it away.
Thank you. Well, hello, everyone. Great to talk to you. Hope we have a good session for you here. Whether you're watching live now or recorded, it will definitely add value to your organization and your efforts with Project Online. So PPM Works is proud again to be part of Project Virtual Conference this year, supporting the volunteer efforts in the greater Microsoft project community. We've been sharing our expertise in events like this since 1998. We want to thank many of the sponsors of the Virtual Project Conference. Some of our other sessions, hopefully you got a chance to see some of these today. If not, definitely pick them up on demand. So some of our sessions, Agile Project Management, Work Management, working with Microsoft Flow, and then right now I'm going to be covering our last of 4, visualizing your data with KPI reporting in Project Online. So again, my name is Scott Clausen with PPM Works. My role as a head of our delivery is essentially working with customers hands-on, helping them with initial implementations of Project Online, migration to Project Online, any customizations, integrations, so forth. So some of the things we hope to cover today and things you'll walk away as learning objectives. So really showing you how to better utilize key performance indicators to monitor your project performance. We're going to look at these really through 4 areas, using the Microsoft Project Desktop Client, using standard Project Online, custom fields, and then kind of transitioning to more of the analytics and reporting with Excel, and then a little bit at the end covering, of course, Power BI. And really our hope is that after this session, you're ready to get started creating KPIs in your organization as soon as possible so you're able to apply everything you learned. And at the end, I'll mention a KPI toolkit that we're happy to offer you. So good, the agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about what KPIs are and then go through the 4 areas: Project Desktop, Project Online, Excel, Power BI, and then really all throughout, we're happy to do some question and answer. In fact, particularly in the Excel area when I have to wait for some of the data to refresh, I'm happy to go and look through the chat to see if there's any questions. So what is a key performance indicator, or KPI? So in project management, it consists of measurements for indicating how well projects and portfolios are achieving specific goals. So when you set up KPIs in your project environment, consider developing them using the SMART criteria originally developed by George Doran and popularized by Peter Drucker. So this SMART acronym stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timed. Some examples for projects that are maybe running behind schedule, you want to be very specific and look at maybe days past due. That would also be something that's easily measurable. Make sure it's achievable. If you have significant resource shortages, it may not be achievable for all projects to finish on time. Something relevant. So for example, you wouldn't want to track costs in organizations that aren't concerned about costs. The timed part is really the easy in project management, easiest because projects should have a defined start and finish date. And that's when you're going to be measuring your KPIs. So this should kind of help you consider what KPIs would benefit your organization. Some examples we see in Microsoft Project Online. Finish variance, so looking at days past the expected finish. Work variance, looking at the total hours spent on tasks or projects. Cost variance, looking at the costs against what was originally planned. Counting late or past due milestones. Counting critical issues for a project, counting critical risks, looking at overutilized resources, and then maybe combining several of these into what we call an overall status. So these are just 8 kind of commonly used KPIs we see in project online environments. There's definitely more. In fact, earned value has probably another 8 just in and of itself. If our organization does earned value, there's lots of great KPI data there. So with that, I'm going to take you to the first demo, and we're talking about using KPIs in Project Desktop. So I'm going to flip over to my Microsoft Desktop client here. And here I have a schedule. And it's a pretty simple schedule, about a little over looks like a little over 100 tasks. And so far we haven't saved what's called a baseline. So what I'm going to do now, I've set up my schedule, is go to the project ribbon, and under set baseline, I'm going to set what's called a baseline. So a baseline, if you haven't used it, is really a snapshot in time. And traditionally, you would set this baseline at the beginning of a project so you're able to measure your, in this case, KPIs against what was originally set as the baseline. So I'll set the baseline now. Now, after I set that baseline, notice here in this baseline finish column, it then populated with all my current dates. And one of the first KPIs we're going to look at is the finish variance. So that's actually automatically calculated for you here in Microsoft Project. Notice the finish variance right now is 0 for all days. But if one of my particular tasks, for example, this task 11 here, or let's go with task 10, was 10 days, and suddenly the duration moved out to 15 days, I'm now seeing a variance, a finish variance calculated. And so what we can do with this finish variance is calculate a metrics for a KPI. And I have this in 2 columns. When you actually implement this, you could probably do it in 1. So what I'm going to use is Microsoft Project's custom fields here. And I have this one called finish IND calc. And when I look at the formula for that, First thing I'm going to do is check that there's a baseline duration, meaning if there's no baseline, I'm just going to show minus 999. And then I'm going to divide finish variance by baseline duration, so I get kind of a percentage slip. And the reason I really like this one for finish is that, you know, if you have a 1-day slip on a 100-day task, it's not a big deal. So we kind of bring in relevance using the percentage. So that's calculated here. And then in my next column here, again, it's a custom field. I'm taking that same number one calculation, and I'm using what's called a graphical indicator to indicate 999 is going to show gray. Those are kind of ones we ignore, but anything over 20% is red, over 10% yellow, otherwise green. And you see that actually in the project schedule here where it goes green. I hit this area where it's red, and then I continue kind of red throughout the schedule. And ideally what you want to do maybe later down the schedule is you're able to move back in those same 5 days by doing a task faster. And notice now by the end of the schedule you can get back to green. Also notice when this is all rolled up, even with that same finish variance in there, when you look at the very top level of the project, if I collapse this, because I only had a 5-day slip, see that's still green. That's less than 1% of the overall project. So that's just an example of how we would implement something where we look around finish variance. What's another example? Let's look at work real quick. Same kind of scenario. I've baselined my schedule. I have a calculation for percentage variance of work. And here I'm going to go and increase my duration, increase my work to 100 hours. So notice the schedule dates didn't change, but the amount of work did, and particularly in this area it goes red because it's over 25% of the work that was originally forecast. And I can actually see in this overall stage it's yellow, but overall for the project it hasn't really even slipped 1%. So this is a way you can look at work as a KPI. So great, we looked at finish variance, we looked at work. Let's look at two other examples. Cost. So maybe the amount of time doesn't increase, maybe the amount of work doesn't increase, but the cost of one of your resources increase. So I'm going to again take this task and I'm just going to use what's called a detail view. And if I just go to, for example, my resource form and increase this cost here from 120 to 220 for this resource. Now notice all the red that suddenly showed up because this resource is kind of used throughout. So just increasing one resource's rate increased my overall cost of my project by 50%. Last one when we look inside Microsoft Project is doing something around milestones. So here's 5 milestones. I can compare these against baseline so that if a particular milestone goes past finish date, maybe instead of finishing on 5/23, it's finished on 6/1. In this case, it shows this milestone is behind. As soon as I have 2 or 3, it goes yellow. As soon as I have 4 or 5, it goes red. So this is just a simple count of late milestones. Let me show you what that formula looks like here. So if it's a milestone and it moves, it has a positive finish variance and we're counting it as 1. And then what we're doing here is we're rolling up that number. And then similar, we have a graphical indicator. Another thing we see sometimes with these milestones is looking at the ones that are past due, not necessarily from baseline, but even the current date, you can do that. So if the milestone is yes, and it's past, and it's less than 100% complete, then we'll count it. Okay, so those are some good examples. If I go back to my presentation here, I have these same listed for you. Here's all the formulas I just used, the 5 different formulas. So looking at finish variance, looking at work variance, looking at cost variance, counting late milestones, counting past due milestones. Okay, so we're going to look at these same KPIs this time in Project Online. So I'm going to flip now to my open browser here for Project Online. So if I go to my PWA settings, Enterprise Custom Fields, really those same formulas that you develop inside Microsoft Project can be created as custom fields. So I have one here called Schedule Status, sorry, Task Schedule Indicator. This is at the task level. It's a and let me show you the formula we have in here. In fact, kind of as a best practice, you can develop your formulas in Microsoft Project and really just copy and paste them here into your Project Online formula field setting. So in this case, we calculate at the task level if there's a variance from finish date. We have our same down here graphical indicators that we're displaying. And of course, the nice thing of putting it into Project Online in an enterprise custom field like this is it's going to then appear for all projects. Now, this is a task field. So what we want to do is create a similar field at the project level. So let me just go back to the field settings, called something like Schedule Status. Now notice this field is at the project level, and it's referencing that calculation we did at the task level. So the task one rolls up to some schedule status. Again, we have our graphical indicators, and when you follow this, you're able to generate project level KPIs. And when you go to, for example, a project center view like this one, we can show these. And let me just do this. There we go, great. Things like overall status, schedule status, cost, resource, risk. Now, you might notice some of these and think, how did you calculate resource and risk? Well, you don't always have to calculate those as formulas. I'm going to go into one of my projects here and show you. You can have a page, for example, a project detail page here where you collect status information just to show you some variety. Maybe you have an overall status that's set. Now, this isn't exactly measurable because individuals are just setting it based on their own sentiment on the project. Or you can have things that are calculated down here like our cost and schedule status that roll up. Or you can have even things like this where you have a budget field that's entered and you calculate the variance based on 2 entered fields. So lots of options in Project Online. So going back to kind of the popular KPIs we looked at, so far we showed finish variance, work variance, cost variance, and a count of late or past due milestones. And really, kind of this first row is all the things you would do using Microsoft Project, using Project Online. The next row here, we're going to have to get a little more advanced. We're going to need to create some reporting and analytics in Excel or Power BI to look at things like counts of issues, counts of risks, resource utilization. So I'm going to show that. And we're going to show that first by going into Microsoft Excel. Now, if you're first kind of new to Project Online, you know that there's not necessarily a database you can access, so you're going to use Open Data Protocol or OData to access the data through HTTP. So it's basically web-based calls to your data in Project Online. And with either Excel or something like Power BI, you're able to connect, query your data, and then present it, for example, in Excel in pivot tables, graphs, etc. So what I'm going to show here is the kind of process for doing that. It's going to start by opening a blank workbook. From the data ribbon, you're going to select Get Data from other sources, OData. And really the kind of lesson learned here is it's going to be your full URL of your site /API/project data. That's going to be your connection string. Once you connect, you're able to pull back these different items or entities. I'm going to show you how to query a bunch of those, kind of connect them and create a KPI-based report in Excel. When you load that data in, there's sometimes extra columns you don't need, so I'm going to show you how to remove those, join those, and then eventually bring them into a pivot table. Now, after you have your Excel file all set up, all you need to do is refresh it, and you're able to see KPI reports. So let's take a look at that. So I'm going to go now to Microsoft Excel, do a new workbook here. All right, so we've launched Excel. And to first bring data into this, you're going to go to the data ribbon, get data, and it's found here under other sources from an OData feed. There's that OData we were looking at earlier. And it's really as simple as entering that URL, and I have mine ready for here in Notepad. So here's my standard URL, and I'm adding that underscore API project data, clicking OK. So it's going out to the project online environment now and pulling back these items. And you can see things like projects here. You can report on assignments, tasks, etc. So we're going to choose this option to pull back some multiple items. We're going to grab this assignment time phase data. We're going to grab risks. And of course, we're going to grab our projects tables. So just 3 here. So after you have those selected, now rather than just loading it, we're going to go edit to right into the query editor tool. So here's those same 3 query entities we selected. Now let's look at our projects entity. When you first come in here, you might scroll and notice there's lots of different columns in here. And maybe you don't need all these columns. So one of the recommendations here is to click this Choose Columns button. What I like to do is unselect all columns, and then I can choose columns I need, like the project UID. I can type in here and do name. So I can grab my project name. And really for the purpose of KPI reporting, maybe there's an indicator we want to show called schedule status. So I click OK. Much simpler to read now that I have just 3 columns here for my project data that I'm going to report on. And the schedule status is that calculated indicator we looked at earlier when we were over in our custom fields. What would you maybe do with risks? Well, this is bringing back all the risks, and one of the common ways you would want to filter this is just to active risks. So I go and find my status column here and choose only the active risks, not the postponed and closed ones. So that shortened the query a little bit of risks. So we have projects, we have risks. Now let's look at this assignment time phase data. So this is actually for every assignment and every project. By day, how many hours are either actual work, etc. And we want to kind of aggregate this data. So I'm going to right-click on this time by day and do something called a transform, because I basically want to convert this instead of daily data into monthly data by looking at the start of the month. So notice how quick that was. It took all my daily data and moved it just to the start of the month. Maybe I even want to rename this after I've done that to start of month. Okay. And then kind of like what we did with the project data, we want to consolidate this a little bit. So I'm going to do something called a group by. And in my group by, I'm going to change to advanced. And I'm going to group by the project ID. Then I'm interested in over-allocated resources. So the next thing I'm going to group by is my resource ID. So it's going to give me projects, resources. Then we're going to group by our start of the month. And then we're going to sum the total amount of hours, so monthly hours. Monthly hours are found in a column called assignment work. So there we go. Project resource, start of basically the month, monthly hours as a sum. So I click OK, and this is one of those points where in my demonstration it's going to take maybe a minute to go ahead and finish this query. So that's a great point for me to go up and look at my chat to see if anyone's had any questions. I don't see that. Okay, great. So if you do have questions, you can put them in the chat, or certainly at the end I can answer any questions. So this will take another maybe 15 to 20 seconds to finish the aggregation of data. There, it's done. All right, so what it's done is projects, resources, start of the month, total hours. And I'm going to actually filter this because I'm only interested in over allocated resources. So I'm just going to say, show me all these months that are greater than 160. Again, we wait a little bit for the query to execute. Should be almost done. All right, there it is. So now I just have rows essentially represent resource months that are over 160. So I have my assignment data showing that. I have the risk data showing active risks, and I have my simple project. Now what we want to do is basically merge all this data together so we can bring it into a nice KPI table in Excel. So I'm going to my projects query here. I'm going to go back and find the merge queries button up here. The first thing I'm going to do is merge my projects data with my risk data. So the two columns that we're going to use to join are project ID. So I have a project ID selected on projects, project ID selected on risks, and I hit OK. And it's joined the risks there. Now, when it brings the risks in, it just shows in this query editor, Power Query Editor, that there's a table linked. So what you want to do is click this button here to indicate what you want out of that table or what you want out of that join. In this case, we want aggregate data, and we're just going to get a simple count of risks. And there it is. And I'll just relabel this so it's really clear. Count of risks. And we actually see in our data that there's a lot of risks on a lot of projects. Some have a few more there, 2, 5, etc. And I just realized that do something to my merge here. Okay. Next, let's do another join now to our assignments data. So I'm going to click Merge Queries again. There's the project. Here's my assignment data. Again, I'm joining on project ID. Okay, and I click OK. And the same kind of thing, let's get just a count of the resource months over that are over allocated. Again, we wait just a little bit for it to query. All right, there we go. And next, let's insert an overall status by using something called a conditional column. So this is kind of like a calculated column based on an if statement, and we'll call this overall status. All right, so if our count of risks is greater than 2, maybe we're going to show this as a 2. If our schedule status is greater than 0.2, meaning 20%, this will also represent a 2. And the last thing we're going to look is our count of resources. Again, if we have greater than 5 resource months, show a 2. Otherwise, just show a 1 in this column. Be about a minute. So every example I've done here is just, general. You'll adjust this to your organization, however you feel best, calculate overall status. So that I show you an example here. So we have kind of 1s and 2s based on that overall status. That maybe something as simple as a red and a green. Now, the next step you would do is do close and load, but I kind of had you wait long enough having data refresh. So I'm going to open another Excel sheet that I've already finished to speed this up a bit. So with this Excel sheet, I created a pivot table. And let me just, actually let me close that other one so I can get back to my pivot table here. All right. Here we go. So this is one I did in advance. And to insert a pivot table, let me kind of show you the design of it here. So I pulled back data from my project table, and I inserted the project name. I inserted the overall status column, the schedule status. Here's a count of risks if I want to insert this as well. And then after you first insert a column, you'll click in that column and go to what's called here under the Home tab, conditional formatting, and you can do essentially something called an icon set, like red, yellow, green here. And when I go to manage that rule under here, I can apply this to risk count. Oops. It's not easily applying, but let me look at one of the other ones I created. So when you create one of these formatting rules, like an icon set, you essentially put in the values, for example, looking at any number over 1.2 being red, any number over 1.1 being yellow, and any number over 0 being green. Otherwise, we have that gray indicator. So when those are applied, they'll appear, and you can set it to appear as a, there we go. Let's apply this to everything in our risk. And you can either have it display with the number alongside it or just the KPI. So in summary, that we spent a lot of time in Excel, but hopefully showed you some valuable tips on using the Power Query to grab data from Project Online, doing some manipulation with those tables, joining them, bringing them back into Excel, and then generating a pivot table with nice KPI data. Let's go back to our presentation. So we kind of finished all 8 of the blocks here. We covered that second row using Excel. And next we're going to go on and talk just for a few minutes here about Power BI. So Power BI Desktop is a free tool you can use on your desktop. There's a Power BI service for online that does require a subscription, but the Power BI Desktop tool is free to download and use. And there's actually a Project Online content pack. I have both those links here that you can download for free. And this will get you started with reporting in Power BI as a sample. So if I open Power BI on my system, find it here. All right, let's open it. And I'm going to actually open the content pack, which I have downloaded here. Okay, now it looks like it's starting to load. So the first thing it's going to do is prompt you for that same URL. So now you want to just paste. In this case, actually shorten URL, just your project URL to your Project Online environment and load the content pack. Should be close to done here. So if you haven't seen this content pack yet, there's a series of about a dozen different reports here along these pages. I'll just wait for this to load. Things like the dashboard, timeline view, there's information on costs, milestones, etc. But let's actually stop here first on this portfolio dashboard view. And you'll notice we see actually some KPIs here for the cost health, work health, and schedule health calculated right inside our Power BI table here. And so I'm going to give you a couple of tips, kind of show you what's going on behind the scenes, being able to get KPIs into your Power BI reports. So kind of much like Excel, this data is coming from your different tables over here on the right in Power BI. And one of those tables, for example, if we click this cost health, we actually see that it's coming from the projects table that's highlighted now. And there it is, cost health. So if I go over here and look at my data, so I'm right now in the report, but if I go and look at my data for the projects table, I can go and find a column like cost health, which is going to be on the far right here. And it's pretty interesting when you look at this column. Try to make it a little wider to show you what's here. It's like all we can do. But if you hover over this, you actually see that, at least in the data table, the value for cost health is a URL. So what's been built into this Power BI content pack is a really dynamic URL that's generated to show KPIs. And that's going to start with your site, which you see right there, site/PWA demo in my case. Then it's looking at the layouts folder 15/INC/PWA/images, and finally this PNG image that starts with CF underscore and ends with number 11p.png. So if we actually click this column, we're able to look into the formula for this column, and we see that cost health is calculated using an if statement. So if the other column called C KPI is less than 10% or over baseline, then show the URL plus this image, PNG. And I think that is the green. Next one, if it happens to be 10 to 20%, then it's going to take the URL and look at the second image. That's going to be yellow. And finally, it's going to generate a red image. So this is a little trick here to calculate in your Power BI different URLs that correspond to different image files on your Project Online site. And the last thing you have to do when you set this up as a formula in Power BI is go to this modeling ribbon and make sure for this column that instead of the data category, which would be blank, that you set it up to show image URL. This way, Power BI knows that this field is an image URL and should be displayed as an image. And that's basically how it's done. So when we go back, I showed you the cost one, but when we go back to our dashboard, you see how these various ones are calculated. You can in fact sort them by their values and see the different KPIs that correspond to images. Pretty tricky, huh? So when we go back to our presentation, we just did a really brief demo of Power BI. And here I have the URLs that they're using. So the base URL is going to be the site. Again, in the layouts 15 INC PWA images folder. And then here's 3 of the several actually colors you have for green, yellow, red. Okay, so we hope that you put some of these tips into practice in your organization today, creating KPIs, whether it be in Microsoft Project, Project Online, Excel, or Power BI, keeping your portfolios and projects in the green. So as mentioned, we have free tips and tricks sessions. You can visit us at ppmworks/Microsoft Workshops for one of those free on-site sessions in your organization, come visit us. Today we're doing the virtual project conference. Next week we'll be at Gartner PPM Summit. And then we have a whole host of online webinars on demand and live. And if you'd like what we call our KPI toolkit, please email us at info@ppmworks, and we're happy to send that off. With that, I want to thank you for your time and wish you a good day, good evening. Thank you. Sorry, one question in the chat. Yep, looks like no questions so far. Thank you.
All right, Scott, thank you for a great session. There are Scott's, I can see Scott gave his contact details. So if anybody has any questions, you can follow with him. The sponsor virtual booths are open and working again. So please feel free to go and chat with the sponsors. PPM Works is one of our gold sponsors. So if you have any questions about the work they do or how they can help you, please definitely follow with them. All right, with that, over and out. Thank you, Scott, again for a great session.
Thank you very much. Have a great evening.